Move forward with agenda item number 8, Nevada Department of Wildlife Project Update, Secretary Wasley, informational. The Commission has requested that the department provide regular project updates for ongoing projects and programs as appropriate based on geography and timing of meetings. These updates are intended to provide additional detail in addition to the summaries provided as part of the regular department activity report and are intended to educate the Commission and public as to the department's ongoing duties and responsibilities. Secretary Wasley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're taking advantage of this opportunity to provide the Commission updates on 3 items in particular. The first item is our urban wildlife program relative to Southern Nevada, and really the impetus for this item came from Clark County Advisory Board, and Paul Dixon had expressed both concern over how we were paying for some of those activities, as well as what things in particular were being done in the southern part of the state. And I think with some of the recent presentations that the Commission has had in northern Nevada, it was a good opportunity being down here to share kind of some of the similar efforts and program specifics down here. And so I'm going to turn it over to Conservation Education Division Administrator Chris Vasey to take us through that program. Another item is the Boulder City Bypass, again geographically relevant to where we are, and Habitat Division Administrator Alan Gilnay will give us an update on that bypass, that project, that effort. And then lastly, just wanted to have kind of a broad discussion with the Commission relative to some of the season and quota discussions that have been before the Commission and the TAC recently, and that'll conclude our project update. So with that, I'd turn it over to Chris Vasey, the Division Administrator for Conservation Education, which is the division under which the Urban Wildlife Program resides.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission. Chris Vasey, Conservation Education Chief for the record. I'm here to introduce Josh Serta, our Urban Wildlife Education Coordinator. He is going to present a project update that was also, as Tony mentioned, or Mr. Wasley mentioned it, that requested from our last Commission meeting in January for the Urban Wildlife Education and Outreach specific to the southern region. Josh has been in this position since 2015. But recently we made these positions full-time due to the demands of the education that was needed and just outside of the call center. So we needed more outreach, more education, so we ended up making these full-time positions. Josh not only answers our urban wildlife calls, but attends meetings with the HOAs, but also has developed numerous education programs for Southern Region Urban Wildlife Program. Additional, Josh started some of our original GIS mapping for our call center. We now use his mapping information to pinpoint areas for most concern for urban wildlife interaction. We use this information to target high call areas and education outreach. We also target these areas with digital education campaigns. I'm going to hand over this presentation to Josh. He's going to have a short presentation, much like we had in the last meeting in December, but it'll be more specific to the southern region. And he'll just speak to some of the campaigns that we've done recently, and additionally some of the education programming that he's developed. So I'll hand it over to Josh.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. My name is Joshua Serta, Nevada Department of Wildlife, for the record. And like Chris said, I'm here to give a brief Southern Region NDOW update on the Urban Wildlife Program. So as was said, this position started in November of 2015. We've been collecting call data on this position since it started. Year by year, I have had a noticeable increase in call volume, totaling over 4,000 calls that I've fielded myself since I've started this program. This is just a very quick chart of the normal call volume that comes in on a yearly basis. Previous years look very similar to this, but they don't have their own unique call rates. So some of the issues that I face and we face at NDOW and the Urban Wildlife Program, mainstream media and social media fears, whether it's inadvertent fears that are created or on purpose, so to speak, through things like the Nextdoor app, which allows residents to go on and speak freely with whatever misinformation or miseducation that they have on the topic at hand. So a majority of my calls that are highly emotional involve the person mentioning Nextdoor app. I wanted to highlight one of the more extreme cases, just so that you guys can have an understanding of what it is that we face in the Urban Wildlife Program. A woman that lived near the edge of town on the west side ended up seeing a coyote catch, kill, and devour a rabbit. So from that occurrence, she made a series of known issues. She now knew what coyotes are capable of, and that her and her mother were next to be eaten and devoured just like the rabbit. She refused every attempt at education that I tried to provide to her, and she also said that from a previous call we had, and I gave her trapper information, trappers refused to trap the coyote. Well, I just so happened to pay her house a visit the next week, had a conversation with her husband who said that they actually did contact trappers. The trappers were more than willing to go out there, but that they didn't like the results that would happen as a result of having this coyote trapped. They wanted it relocated. They didn't want to pay the fee associated with that, but that's not what happens when coyotes are trapped. So what I do and what the Urban Wildlife Program does, number one, educate citizens on the urban wildlife encounters, and this is mainly over the phone. I have to assess each situation on a case-by-case basis in the moment. I don't have time to refer to a document, look up laws. It's done in the moment to figure out whether it's a legitimate threat, a perceived threat, a nuisance issue, or just a general question like, where have the birds gone? I've seen them every day. Where are they now? I have to determine an appropriate response for that moment. It's very rare that I have to hang up the phone and go ask someone as to what needs to be done for this situation. Whether it's educating on hazing, exclusion, an in-person needs to show up and address an issue, whether it's law enforcement or myself, or refer to an outside agency if we do not manage that species. Data collection is a big part of my position, which you'll see in a little bit, and presentation. So I've done HOA presentations all throughout the valley, north, south, east, west, everywhere in between. So this is an example of my most popular presentation, Living with Coyotes. So I explain to people coyote biology, what makes them tick, what's their motivation, how they can help themselves and their neighborhoods be more free of coyote activity, and so that coyotes don't feel as comfortable being around, and how to haze them. Another is urban wildlife, so wildlife in general that you might see in an urban setting. A lot of people have the idea that wildlife has no business being in a neighborhood, and if they are, they're obviously lost or something's going on. Someone needs to come and remove them, relocate them back to their home. And finally, rattlesnakes in southern Nevada. So the common thread among these two, except for rattlesnakes, is hazing. It's been documented as the most proficient way to deal with nuisance coyote encounters as opposed to lethal removal. I explain to these people, don't run away. There's a lot of folks that claim that they're being chased by coyotes. Well, when the story comes out, it's usually that they initiated running and the coyote chased after them, as predators do. I go through how to haze a coyote, not to do this in a timid manner. It's not a magic spell that animals have to fall under, and they have no other choice but to follow what you're doing. That you have to actually sell hazing. You can't do it in a timid manner. And I also go over when you shouldn't haze, like if there's a den or puppies nearby. So for some of the more aggressive wildlife cases, law enforcement is notified, Endow law enforcement, but some Con Ed measures that we've taken in the southern region to kind of validate or legitimize these claims, we bought trail cameras and electronic predator collars. So I've set out trail cams and I've done calling to try to validate these. None have been substantiated. So we just wanted to see what was going to happen with these extreme cases. We came back with a little bit of coyote activity, but other than that, it was, fairly normal. So this is a representation of the data that I've collected. This is showing both the southern region and the western region. And through this, we have started a over the top, which is basically satellite or cable alternative TV. So think of Hulu or Sling TV. We've created an ad campaign on living with coyotes and what you can do to help your neighborhood, help yourselves, help the coyotes, if you want to think of it that way. We've targeted 6 zip codes that have been shown as the more hot spots in the region. And with that, we have been able to target these commercials to better suit these hotspot areas, as opposed to spending a larger amount of money throughout all of Las Vegas. We're going to pinpoint these locations. And I have done HOA talks on living with coyotes in all of these regions. So it's not just myself or the ad campaign that is doing the job. It's a culmination of everything. And this is just a representation of where these commercials have been seen so far. So as of March 13th, we've seen there has been almost 27,000 people that have watched this video, with 98% of the videos running to completion. So everyone has seen this 1 and 26-second video on coyote hazing and living with coyotes. And so I wanted to show this video to you today. It's going to debut right here for you guys, and if we can play the video. Thousand people that have watched this video, with 98% of the videos running to completion. So everyone has seen this 1 and 26-second video on coyote hazing and living with coyotes. So I wanted to show this video to you today. It's going to debut right here for you guys. Thousand people that have watched this video. 98% of the videos running to completion, so everyone has seen this 26 seconds video on coyotes. So I wanted to show this video to you today. It's going to debut right here.
All right, any questions? Questions for Josh? Secretary Wasley, something you wanted to comment on?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank Chris and Josh for the presentation and add that this has been one of those growing issues. We saw the histogram that showed the increase in calls and demands. This has been an issue that the legislature has taken particular interest in and pointed directly at the department with some very pointed questions. What are you doing? And so that opened the door for the department to seek general fund dollars to address some of the growing urban wildlife issues. So the department is now in our 3rd session in a row where we have a governor's recommended budget with a specific line item for urban wildlife. We have Josh's position in the south and Jessica's in the north, formerly Jessica's, now she took another position, that are dedicated to this. There was a small portion of their salaries that were subsidized, if you will, by sportsman's revenue, and our budget, the governor's recommended budget that's in the legislature right now, has put forward a proposal to replace all of that sportsman revenue with pure general fund dollars. all the equipment, the vehicles, every other aspect of the program has been general fund dollars. And I think that was part of the concern by Clark County, was that they didn't want us, they didn't like the idea that we would be using sportsman revenue to do these things. I understand that, but I also understand that if we can assist with some of that sportsman revenue, at least until such time that we have general fund to do it wholly with general fund, it actually helps those more traditional programs focus on their primary and secondary purposes too. When we get the number of calls that we receive, particularly in the Vegas and Reno areas, with citizens looking for assistance with animals, it's important that we have some resources dedicated to that. And we're, again, pursuing to be able to completely fund this program with general fund dollars, and we believe that we're going to be there very soon. But the portion of sportsman revenue dollars that are going there now is a very, very small portion of the total program.
Commissioner East.
Josh, can you come back up and go back to the slide that showed the graphic of the So, can you tell us maybe what was going on with some of the peaks and valleys here?
Yeah, sure. Joshua Serta for the record. So you see a lot of activity occurring in the spring with baby birds, baby rabbits, everything is laying eggs or giving birth somehow. So a good amount of that is happening in the spring, but coyote calls are a constant. So it's, if you look at January, there's 136 calls in January. Almost all of those are coyote calls. You're not having really any baby bird calls. You'll have every now and then something's injured. The random issue, but a majority of these things are coyotes, and in the summer months, it's what people considered injured or orphaned birds, which are just fledgling birds that are doing things that fledglings do, but people misunderstand what it is that they're seeing, and so they think that these things need help, and that I'm a bird whisperer of sorts, and there to help and take in every baby bird. Same thing with rabbits. But that's really what's going on is. And then you have things like the breeding cycles. So coyotes are breeding in the fall, giving birth in the late winter, early spring. Mm-hmm. And so the October, November time, good breeding time for coyotes. People are seeing coyotes that are out trying to find a mate that don't already have one. Some of the explosions in the springtime are new coyote parents that are having to go out and feed more mouths than they were before. So there is an increased coyote presence in the spring, late fall, and in winter.
And in a perfect world, you'd have the time maybe to educate ahead of that. Is that in your plan at all? So that when you're doing your presentations, you're trying to get ahead of those so that you can cut down those calls?
Yes, yeah. I've written up newsletters, articles, brochures that I can provide to HOAs that they can spread however they choose. And you know, I tell people, hand my number out to anyone that you have, even if it's on the Nextdoor app. If they have questions, comments, concerns, give me a call. But I try to educate everyone that I talk to on what it is that they're seeing, if it's natural or normal or not. And a lot of people I talk with say that they are in contact with their neighbors, and so they're going to spread the word that they received from me. You know, if you have any other questions, provide my phone number to your neighbors also. But yeah.
Do you educate through Nextdoor?
It doesn't work that way.
No, it can. I've seen it.
Really?
Yeah, because I get a lot of, I'm on Nextdoor and I get a lot of the similar stuff but I'm from Reno, so we get the bobcats and the mountain lions. There's a bear in my backyard.
Yeah.
But I've seen the fire department, Truckee Meadows Fire, does do updates on Nextdoor, and it might be something to consider.
Is that one specific location that falls within that next door region, that neighborhood region, or is that next door for the total area?
I'm not sure, but I think you could probably look into it
Yeah.
and find out. Might be an opportunity to to post something so that you're educating ahead of some of these
Sure.
calls.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Good
Thank
job.
you.
What is next door?
Nextdoor is a geographic specific app that you can post information on for your neighborhood. So you just look up your neighborhood and
Yeah, there's 4 houses in my neighborhood, so.
no, you'd be surprised. You can put in a distance that you want to cover. And so I think I set mine to 10 miles and I get all the stuff from Northwest Reno, North Reno.
Okay, got it. I just open up the window and say, hey, what's going on? Thank you, Josh. Thank you, Chris. It's informative. I'm surprised. I think what is most surprising to me is just the sheer number of calls. That's a lot.
And next up,
Boulder City Bypass, Jim.
Boulder City Bypass.
Alan Janae. No.
Habitat Division Administrator, Alan Janae.
Right on. Thank you. For the record, Alan Janae, Habitat Division Administrator. I wanted to take advantage of why we were down here in Vegas and kind of give you guys an overview of a project where we have had technical review input. It's a project that was conducted by NDOT. It's a good example of partnership. Boulder City Bypass, many of you are probably familiar with it. It's a project that basically went around Boulder City, went through the El Dorado Hills to avoid that kind of slow traffic that was created by going through Boulder City. It now loops around and goes to the Hoover Dam bypass that was previously completed, and it ties in out to the 93, I think it's I-15, and that whole mess there. It is a major Canadian-Mexican trade corridor, so it is a high priority. I'm doing double click duty here. Here is the alignment. You can see that it ties into that previous Boulder Dam. The alignment there is in orange. One of the big considerations in doing this project was that it needed to keep a 6% grade over the El Dorado Hills. If you look, I don't know how well you can see it, but on your map there, if you look just to the right of Boulder City in blue, kind of where that alignment is, there's a major ridge there that they actually had to cut. And that span in there was about 700 feet. So pretty significant work in there. Again, the EIS, the record of decision required that NDOT and Federal Highway Administration work with the Nevada Department of Wildlife and the National Park Service to ensure wildlife crossing and to address wildlife vehicle collisions with a specific emphasis on desert bighorn sheep. An important part of this whole project was at the same time the Clark County Fuel Revenue Index came to bear in 2013 and provided substantial funding contribution. So in this project, NDOT managed about 2.3 miles and RTC managed the majority at 12 miles. It was a 4-year completion commitment to try to do this. In October 2013, after the record of decision and once things were ready to roll, there was a meeting of the parties, including Park Service, NDOT, Federal Highway Administration. We also brought in the USGS, U.S. Geological Service, and the Arizona Game and Fish Department. USGS had past experience with bighorn studies on the Hoover Dam bypass, and Arizona Game and Fish they actually have a wildlife transportation program down in their state, and so they had a real suite of expertise and experience that was brought to bear. One of the big things that helped in this project was that it was a design build project, and so it really gave the flexibility to the developer. Instead of trying to meet plan specs, they were absolutely provided the flexibility to be able to go forward and make tweaks as they were going through it. Also, we entered into an agreement with an MOU with Arizona Game and Fish, again, to bring forward their expertise. NDOT and Federal Highway Administration helped pay for that MOU, but it allowed for on-the-ground monitoring and input. Again, the measures were to promote permeability for the desert bighorn. Other things that were considered within this is that we wanted multi-year monitoring using GPS collars to track the sheep during or before, during, and post-construction. We wanted that opportunity to provide input into the design build. We were looking at on-the-ground monitoring and construction, so those were things that Arizona were doing. And then at the end would be monitor passage of the bighorn on the 4 bridges and the single overpass that were designed into the project. So as you look at this map here, you can see that there were 4 bridges under which bighorn sheep could move. Additionally, if you look, you can see the B5 as the wildlife overpass there. So there was a lot of passage built into this project. The B5, as I mentioned before on that previous map there, just to the right of Boulder City, you can see that's the big overpass. I'll show you an image of that here in just one second. So here is this is the start of that arch span on that wildlife pass, and so you can see the raw cut on that hillside of just how much of that ridge they had to take out. And so that was a major consideration because that's a continuing ridge, and that was something that the bighorn sheep used to travel up and down. So it was a well-placed ridge, or a well-placed overpass. It was kind of funny that at the grand opening of this overpass on August 9th of 18, is that the bighorn sheep were there as well. It's like they received their cue. So it was pretty neat. So here's kind of some of the information. This is a zoom in of Bridge 9. It's over next to the Hoover Dam Lodge. They have a water treatment pond there where the sheep have actually grown accustomed to using, and you can see these are the trails that were identified. One of the big things in that was that that Bridge 9 originally was scheduled to just be fill. But as we recognized that the bighorn used it so much, there was actually a meeting on site to consider that, and they decided no, instead of a fill and a box culvert, they would actually open it up to a bridge. Turns out it's been one of the more important bridges for passage. Here's an image here. Not only did that help, but also within that bridge design is that they made some major tweaks to the drainage pattern underneath there. You can see that concrete. Originally this was planned to be almost concrete side to side, so one of the things they did was narrow that up to provide passage for flows but allow the opportunity for sheep to move through there. It has gotten to the point, I don't know how well you can see it on your screens, but it's gotten to the point that these sheep have totally grown accustomed to it. They'll often lay underneath there on hot days and take advantage of the shade. That's with traffic on site. Here's another, this is a post-construction photo documentation. This is one of the things, we've actually got different colored tags. We've got different stationed camera traps on there so we can tell when they're going up and going down. So that's one of the major pieces in the research and confirming success on this project. Here's a roadside image of the overpass. This was at the grand opening. You can see up on the left-hand side there, that's wildlife pickup that's parked up there. If you can look in front of that, there's actually boulders stacked up so that that's only for human access. You can't pull a vehicle on there. One of the things I did learn in talking to these guys, oftentimes I always had the impression that these overpasses were built to a lesser degree than typical bridges or overpasses, and that is not the case because of it's a dead load because of all the soil that they put on there for to promote the use by wildlife. Here's a picture of Pat Cummins working with Chad from Arizona Game and Fish. You can look out beyond. One of the major modifications that they made in this design on the backside, on the south side of the overpass, was that ridge that you can see just kind of off of Pat's hat, it actually came closer and actually had a more confined view. And as they got up there and using past experience of all the parties that were involved with past bighorn sheep crossings, is they thought, we really need to lay this back and kind of give them that more open appearance. And so the contractor, no problem, brought in equipment, knocked that back and gave that a more open approach. And nowadays, you can often see the sheep moving through with little hesitation. As you can see there, just behind that ewe's head is a camera. One of the things that they did in constructing this is they actually put in electrical up there so that you didn't have to worry about trying to put generators on site to monitor. They've got other monitoring equipment on there, and so these were small considerations, in that design build that you may not have picked up on had you, been a plan set that you just had to supply prior to construction. Other lessons learned, this is kind of east of, what is that, Boulder City Lodge, or the lodge. And it's kind of where the road used to go. What you see now is Arizona has learned that sheep are very good at manipulating cattle guards. And the old style wings that you typically see on a cattle guard, they will walk right up to that, and that'll get them halfway across a single cattle guard, and they'll jump across it. And so what you see here is now you've got a double thickness cattle guard, and those little, they've got the posts right up to the edge of the concrete, and that concrete, that's only like a 3-inch lip there. And that's tight enough to where those sheep can't jump the double crossing, and they can't walk that lip tight enough. They feel uncomfortable, and so this is actually what it takes to prevent a bighorn sheep from crossing a cattle guard. And they did, on this picture here, they did have cameras on each of the end posts when they were doing the monitoring. They had to kind of test this whole idea. They were running camera traps to test that design. Another lesson learned was the jump outs. This is a concrete jump out. I know it doesn't really, you can't really tell here, but what they do is they have the right-of-way fences that'll run up to these, and just in case the sheep actually get inside the right-of-way, they can come to this and they will jump down and out of the right-of-way. One of the lessons that Arizona has learned is that sheep will, they can manipulate a 6-foot jump out, so they can stand at the bottom of a 6-foot elevation jump out and jump up, no problem. 8 feet is what they've got to set those heights to prevent them from doing that. And they did a whole bunch of studies, to actually test this, where they were doing different heights and whatnot. So it's kind of a neat piece of information. The other thing that Arizona has learned over time is that these concrete fortified jump outs, they don't slump. The old earthen pile would slump, and so you'd lose elevation over time. And so these are little things that were incorporated into this project using past experience. So again, in summary, I think this was a great project. You know, many of our wildlife passage are up north. This was a great opportunity to get in at the ground level on a new project, working with Federal Highway Administration and NDOT, along with a whole lot of other partners. But I thought it was a really good example to highlight why you guys were down here. And with that, if you have any questions.
Questions for Mr. Janae? Well, thank you. Very, very informative and cool.
I tried to make it quick. Yeah, and there's the last one. I decided whether or not to put that in. That was designed for me. Yeah, so hopefully that was quick enough.
Thank you. Understood.
Are we, excellent, thank you. Tony Washley for the record. I think what I wanted to just kind of put out there today for you all was kind of a agency, some of the conversations and discussions that occurred within the agency subsequent to our season setting meeting. And I think the general sense was internally that maybe we were remiss in engaging in a way that might have assisted you all in making the most informed decisions relative to season settings. And I think what happens is, you know, we're immersed in this stuff all day, every day, and sometimes we forget that we have turnover in places, that you know, commissioners come and go, that you all have a whole host of issues that you're dealing with as commissioners and in your day jobs and everything else. So coming out of that meeting, I think we had some discussions internally, and it wasn't so much frustration or disappointment with any particular decision as it was us questioning whether or not we were doing an adequate job of providing you all the most knowledge and information to make the most informed decisions. And I think where that manifested itself, you know, most prominently in terms of our discussions had to do with some of the season structure changes between what the department recommended, between what the cabs wanted, and where the commission ultimately landed. And so, you know, we talked about it internally, and I said, well, I would really like to try to have a conversation with the commission and make sure that we are doing our due diligence in communicating to you, whether we're talking about season structure, whether we're talking about quota, whether we're talking about population objectives for elk or mule deer or anything else, that we have a well-established and effective communication to where when you're making your decisions, regardless of where that decision lands, you have the most information and knowledge upon which to base that decision. And so I kind of wanted to look at mule deer in particular and just highlight some of the challenges that we have as an agency. And what this graph shows is the last 3 years, the number of total applications for mule deer as compared to the total number of tags available for mule deer. And what is quite obvious is that we have an ever increasing demand and a stable to slightly increasing maybe supply. But the challenge remains the same, and depending on what species you look at, you know, the numbers are challenging. And so as an agency, the last thing we want to do is make any recommendation to you all that would put the quantity or quality of the herds in jeopardy. We would never want to sacrifice the quantity or quality of our herds for the purposes of increasing participation or for the purposes of generating revenue. But this is a very real challenge, and it's a growing challenge. So many of our recommendations kind of have, you know, this in mind. How can we maximize opportunity and not impact or affect the herds? And so One of the ways that we look at that, and this is some public survey data, and absent other data, we sit in the commission meetings and CAB meetings, and certainly we gather input from what folks want. This was a survey that was conducted 5 years ago of just mule deer applicants, people who had applied, I think in the previous 2 or 3 years, and there was somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,000, maybe 800 people surveyed, and we were really, as a department at that time, trying to understand, that demand in this previous slide. When we look at those blue bars, what's driving those people in those blue bars to want to get a mule deer tag? What is it that they are after? And so we asked this question, or actually it had a survey administered, and they came up with this question. The quality of a Nevada mule deer hunting experience is dependent on how many different attributes. What is important to you? Or is dependent on many different attributes. What is important to you? And so as you look through this, being able to hunt mule deer with family and friends, it was extremely important for 45%, quite important, 31%, and it varies all the way down to harvesting a doe, harvesting a large antlered mule deer. It's kind of all over the place. But after that meeting, I thought, well, this data, when we've done this type of survey at least 3 different times relative to mule deer, 10 to 12 year increments, I think going back into the early 90s, I believe, mid 90s maybe, early 2000s, again in 2014, and we see this split. Where we have roughly half, I'll say, that really have this focus on being able to hunt mule deer with friends and family, to another significant portion, seeing a trophy mule deer. In this, you can see there's roughly half want to be able to hunt mule deer every year. Other people say, well, I'd rather, draw my first choice, or so it's all over the board. And I think that's really what's important, is that the expectations, again, looking at the blue bars, when we look at what's making up the motivations behind those people that make up the blue bars, there isn't one prominent mindset that's shared by folks. So one of the things that we talked about, and this as a department, this goes back to probably 2004, 2005. We said, how do we meet this expanding demand, this increased demand? How can we meet both the demand for opportunity and the demand for quality? And like I said, the commission in past years has said, well, we need to know what people want. We need to do a survey, and each of those 3 surveys has shown us that there are multiple attitudes and opinions that motivate people. So when the department said, how can we try to do both, this idea of a split season structure came up. And the idea was we could have an early season structure that would be in a hot, dry time of year where most of the deer aren't as susceptible to harvest, certainly not the larger, high quality deer that a large portion of our hunters are after. People that don't mind seeing more hunters in the field, don't mind not being successful, but just want to hunt with friends and family every year, could go out in the field, and we see hunter success rates that are in the neighborhood of a third of the hunters, 35% or so. Then to accommodate those who have expressed a desire for a higher quality experience, better hunting conditions, lower temperatures, maybe some snow, fewer hunters in the field, getting close to the rut. We could have a longer season with fewer hunters at a time where their likelihood for success would increase, and we see maybe 65% hunter success. And the idea is that we kicked around, we said, well, what if, some people said, well, let's just have opportunity areas and let's have trophy areas. Well, any idea for a potential opportunity area was somebody's trophy area, and any opportunity or any trophy area was going to be somebody else's opportunity area. There was always, somebody's ox was getting gored every time. So this idea of taking a single unit and dividing it and accommodating both those interests seemed logical at the time. Well, I don't know that the department did an adequate job of explaining that. It evolved at a time where probably few of you were on the commission. I know a lot of you understand the logic in that. And then when we got to some of those conversations at the last commission meeting setting seasons, this is, I think, where the conversation internally went, is, you know, was the commission, did the department do its job in making the commission aware of all the decision pieces around that? So I think just with some specific questions that have arisen since some of those season adjustments were made, you know, well, why would a given county, you know, want to do away with the early-late split? And I think that's a really valid question. It's a really good question, and I don't know. I mean, some of the counties that wanted to do away with those may have said why they wanted to do away with them. I can't remember. But certainly having a single longer season creates more flexibility for people to get in the field if they do have a tag. We looked at hunt days. This graph, this histogram shows how many days on average different weapon classes spend in the field. So there's 3 years, 15, 16, 17, and then 5-year average. And you see very little change. Any legal weapon is the lowest, the 5-year average, 4.6 days in the field. Archery, the longest, just over 6.5 days in the field, and muzzleloader right in between those two. Certainly there could be some individuals spending more time and individuals spending less time, but wanted to look specifically at maybe how some of the season changes affect some of our ability as an agency to meet some of the demand. And just looking at the 011 to 013 mule deer example, the approved resident quota, 60 early, 10 late for last year. If there was those 70 tags in a split season scenario, you have again a low early hunt success, a higher late. Total number of bucks harvested, 28. If you go to a single season, you have to program in higher hunter success. So with higher hunter success, that puts fewer people in the field. So what we're potentially looking at is something around a 30% decrease in tags in that particular area, with a 0% effect on the herd quality, herd quantity, buck number, fawns per 100 does, the exact same herd characteristics and quality. No obvious change or difference in any direction. In that particular area, the projected post-season buck to doe ratio is 40 to 100, 40 bucks to 100 does. Biologically, I mean, any measure of success, any comparison to other states, that is incredibly high. Early season success rate 35%, late season success rate 65%, and so these numbers are assuming a single season success rate of about 55%. And I think we did share some of this, but I think the point that we shared it was probably late, and that, you know, we could have done a better job of sharing some of the logic. And again, this isn't to necessarily drive a particular outcome as much as it is to inform your decision, so that whatever potential consequences of those decisions arise, the commission's at least fully aware of some of the logic behind the recommendations and some of the consequences of the decisions. Looking at 014, the same kind of scenario, split versus single, would be a 34% decrease. Again, early season success rate 35, late season success rate 65. If you have a single season, you assume 55. You have more people that can take advantage of the late. You have more people that can take advantage of weather, and so it kind of forces everybody to conform or adhere to a single motivation at the expense of perhaps some who just wanted that opportunity to hunt with friends and family. I won't belabor the point. This is a hypothetical example with a population estimate, again, just showing that if we look at early versus late season success rates at 35, 65, it's roughly a 30% decrease in opportunity for a 0% change in herd quantity, quality, and a 0% change in total harvest. So again, this was just one issue that made us realize that we want to try to do a better job of informing, and that means our staff specialists, when we're putting our recommendations forward, we need to share the thought, the logic, and what we've talked about internally is trying to bring our regional supervisors, who, much like the county advisory boards, have a valuable local perspective that they can bring and share, and some of the strategies, whether it's hunter crowding issues and private land conflicts, or elk management objectives, or different weapon classes. There's some nuance as you go around the state that the cabs are really important in bringing forward. But I think that we've had turnover as well in our game division, and I don't think I've done a good enough job at encouraging our staff specialists to, when they make their recommendations, to give the full gamut of reasons and consequences and ramifications. So I know that we're going to be talking about quotas at our May meeting. We made some season changes that are going to change the way that those quotas are recommended. In some instances, those things can amplify one another, and other ways they can negate. But I just wanted to let you know that in May that we'll try to put forward our recommendations with a more explanation than we did with some of the season structure conversations, and that should you have any questions at all during that process, I would welcome the opportunity for our biologists, regional biologists, field biologists, or staff specialists to share their professional opinions on potential effects or consequences. One of the last thing I'll say is that oftentimes we have recommendations that are that may come from the public or may come from cabs with assumptions behind them as far as achieving a particular objective, and whether or not they do or don't, or will or won't meet that objective could be an issue of debate or could be subject to question. So again, I think the department just wants to reaffirm that we're going to try to provide more explanation as we put those recommendations out, and we'll stand ready to take any questions as far as potential ramifications. So just wanted to throw that out there and share some of those numbers. So thank you.
Questions for Secretary Walsley? Commissioner McNinch?
Not so much a question. I appreciate you getting up and walking us through stuff like that. In the back of your mind, in my mind, I guess I haven't understood. I know that there's stuff working like that back there, but without you getting up here and talking about it and going through it, for me at least, I understand that better now. And yeah, I think it is good to have those conversations. It helped. I got a lot out of this. We've never had that conversation before with that example that you just had. So.
Well, I appreciate that, and I'll tell you that this isn't a comfortable position for me to be in, and I've hemmed and hawed and thought extensively about what I could or couldn't or should or shouldn't say up here. But I think at the end of the day, you all have the unenviable challenge of disappointing people, whatever that decision is. And there's no decision that you make as a body that makes everybody happy. And I don't think it's about making the Department of Wildlife happy, but I think it's about having the all the information that you can have when you make that decision. And I don't believe that we as the department did an adequate job in informing some of our recommendations in a way that you had the benefit of all that. And so it's still, it's still a difficult conversation to have. And I'll also share that when I look at that demand and that supply, of course we're doing a ton of stuff on the habitat side and water development side and fires, reseeding and invasives, because ultimately the thing that makes our job and your job easier is more abundant wildlife. Until we can have more abundant wildlife, or until we realize the fruits of our labors in trying to create more abundant wildlife, we're still going to have the challenge of a demand that outpaces our supply. And at the same time, we're trying to secure the future of conservation through opportunities to fund conservation through people willing to pay for participation. We also risk not failing to meet people's expectation, their expectation and desire to participate, where people are dropping out every day because they don't have that adequate opportunity. So when there are places that we can provide more opportunity without any expense to the resource, that's what we're going to try to do. And we understand, again, that you're the ones that make the decision at the end of the day.
Any additional, Commissioner East?
I asked this question of Tony last night at dinner, but I'm going to ask it again because I think we all probably need to hear it. We talked a little bit at our last meeting about trying to marry the quotas and the season settings and then the tag allocations. And can you explain to us why that's probably not in our best interest?
So that question is still a question that the department had specific direction to reach out to some of the cabs, or all of the cabs for that matter, and get input from them relative to the process. There are some challenges when you look at the timing of our surveys, and the last surveys that we do are for the spring mule deer surveys, and during those spring mule deer surveys we determine overwinter survival of the previous spring's fawn crop, and it's that recruitment that really drives the population trends. And we know through collar data, Nevada-specific data, that we can have significant mortality even into the month of May. So if we're doing our spring deer surveys in late March or early April, and there's some uncertainty in the minds of our biologists, that conservatism, that finds its way into the population estimate and as conservatism. And if we were to try to do that earlier, I think we'd be introducing more conservatism. And when I say conservatism, I think there's going to, nobody wants to jeopardize the quantity or quality of the resource, and it's certainly not the biologist whose job it is to ensure the health of the herd. So the earlier that goes, the more uncertainty there is. The more uncertainty there is, the more conservatism there would be in that recommendation. So for some species, it's not as much of an issue. Pronghorn, bighorn sheep, and elk are typically all done, in January, late January. Then that begs the question: well, would you want two separate application periods? And then there's issues and challenges with that, separating that, having an early application period for some species and a later. And so really the bottleneck is the spring survey for deer and the sense of confidence that the department would have with the recommendation that we put forward, that is then oftentimes challenged at a local level and challenged at a statewide level. And so we have multiple opportunities to introduce conservatism in what's already a pretty conservative estimate, and backing that up to earlier in the year, I think would introduce more conservatism, which would probably widen that gap between applicants and tags.
Mr. Valentine?
Director Wasley, Regarding the information, you know, a lot of the recommendations that come to us are from the cabs, and will all that information be available to the cabs when they?
Absolutely, and I think, I mean, that was one of my concerns in having this conversation is I did not want the cabs to perceive that the department was in any way, shape, or form undermining or undervaluing their input. I think it's an integral part of the process. I think we have a very successful relationship between the commission and the department, the commission and the cabs. I think that cab input, as I said a moment ago, as far as representing local conditions and local issues, they know, you know, better than anybody what some of those challenges are: shifts in weapon class, shift in seasons, access challenges, weather conditions. You know, that's a really important piece, and you know, the department in no way, shape, or form would want to circumvent that process. I think the challenge, as I sit here and talk about how we want to do a better job of justifying our recommendations, or at least presenting the logic or the science in our recommendations, the challenge would be how do we do that proactively with the cabs that are meeting a week or two before the commission does? And I think the obvious answer to me is that we need to be engaged. I read the cab meeting minutes, and I read this county took no action on this item because nobody from the department was there, or nobody from the department knew, or nobody from the department. And so that's where it comes back to us as leadership and headquarters to have informed staff engaged with the cabs. And so that was the other part of our discussion, is that we haven't done, and at the end of the day, it's capacity. It's the tyranny of the urgent, and we scramble, from the legislature to back to the office, and I mean, you heard all the correspondence that I shared today and the stack of public records requests, and we're a lean agency. We have limited capacity, but that's no excuse for not communicating adequately with the commission or the cabs. And so we've acknowledged we need to do a better job in our outreach and education, and that includes the cabs, and it includes having a presence, an educated and informed presence at the cab meetings. And this isn't the first time that the agency has had that recognition, and it's waxed and waned through the years as far as who has been at the cabs. And even now, there are some that are excellent, and just like the Carson Cab and Gene Green's complimentary email relative to Russell Woolstenhume's engagement. And so around the state, we have some individuals that are plugged in, well-informed. Other places, not so much, just like cabs. Sometimes, there's counties where cabs haven't met or they don't have a functional cab, and others that they're on top of things, and, based on geography and representation. But we don't want to be the bottleneck. We don't want to be the reason why a cab can't take a position on something, because either there was nobody there from the department or nobody from the department was aware or informed.
Commissioner Olmberg.
Just this discussion here, it takes me back to our harvest management guidelines and all of the discussions that we had back then in regards to the putting on biological boundaries and social boundaries, all those things. And, we put a ton of effort in discussion, and we never really left. Again, it was my wish that we would have continued with that and come to conclusion with it. We never did. We talked about it a lot, but in the end, we never did. Come to finalize that, and it would have been nice to do it, because I think it would have helped when all these issues come. We've discussed this in detail. Just my thought. That's where my mind goes.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thank you. Careful what you wish for.
I guess I just I tend to agree with Commissioner Olmberg. Perhaps that's something we get back moving forward. But I also, when I look at the survey data, I know that there's a lot to talk about. It's important and very important to get out and hunt the opportunity. But also what's important is low hunter congestion and seeing quote-unquote trophy bucks. So it's a lot of, I want to hunt every year, but I don't want everybody else to hunt because I want low hunter densities, and I want to see a lot of trophy animals. I think we always have to be cognizant of creating opportunity. If it doesn't turn out to be a good experience, will not be the opportunity people want. So there's a trade-off too. So I understand quality, quantity, and I guess this explains very much when we go into the quota setting in May, and perhaps Washoe County says, well, we had this many tags last year with the split season. Why aren't we having that same number of tags across a single season? And says, well, because we anticipate a higher success rate. And so now with the single season, you're going to have less people with a longer opportunity. And that we'll see how people react to that. So, all right. Anything else? Thank you. We'll go on. That concludes agenda item number 8, correct?
Yes, sir.
All right, and we'll then move on to public comment period. Agenda item number 9. Persons wishing to speak are requested to complete a speaker's card and present it to the recording secretary. Public comment will be limited to 3 minutes. No action can be taken by the commission at this time, and any item requiring commission action may be scheduled on a future commission agenda. I'll start in Reno. Any public comment in Reno?
Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, my name is Gerald Lent. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I have some questions on the marked boxes. If you do these marked boxes, I think you ought to reverse the order that they're in. And I think the one box should say, include my draw results on the list of all tag draw results that we post online. And I don't think you need to list some of the entities I want the list, because you might leave somebody out, and this would be discriminatory. But why do this? As any good prosecutor knows, you can lead the witness by the way you ask the question to get the result you want. And the proper way to ask this question is, and I would like the commissioners maybe to write this down, you need one box, and it says, remove my name from any list sold by the department or contractor. And I hope some of the commissioners write that down, because that's all you need. This solves the private issue. And what is wrong with this? Just tell the applicant that they can opt out. And also, what if no box is checked? Then it should indicate privacy is not an issue. Don't assume they want to be private. It's not an issue if they don't mark the box. But I think that one box, that's all you need to do, and said, remove my name from any list sold by the department or any contractor. All you need, and there's no need to go in all this other stuff, confusion. And I want somebody to tell me what's wrong with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lent. Any further public comment in Reno?
Yes.
Yes, we do.
Okay.
I guess I'm next. This is Darrell Capurro appearing on behalf of myself. I oppose both box suggestions from the staff for NEC 502-211. Basically, they are not in concert intent of the current regulation. The opt-out, the current provision of...
Mr. Capurro, could you get closer to the phone? I think you're breaking in and out, but...
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, nothing in the Nevada law, nothing in Nevada law, NRS Chapter 239, in court cases, exempts the DOW or the applicants who are successful or unsuccessful in the draw. suggestions set forth by Dr. Lent respect to clarification of the written saleable list exemption available to all applicants. Only 5 members of this commission are supposed to represent sportsmen. If any of you support the staff suggestion, which destroys transparency, you are not properly representing sportsmen on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Capro. Any further public comment in Reno?
Yes, Chairman. This is Jim Purrier, and I am a member of the Guides Association, and I'd like to speak to two.
All right, wait, hold on. You guys have got to get closer to the phone or something because you're breaking in and out.
I was about 8 inches, now I'm about 2. How's that?
Okay, well then maybe get a little further away from the phone or something, but you're breaking in and out.
How is that? Is that better?
Well, you got to keep talking for me to tell you if it's better or not.
Okay, this is Jim Purrier.
Okay, that's better.
Okay, member of the Guides Association. I'd like to bring up 2 issues. First of all, I was vice president of the Guides Association when we raised our fees by 300%. It was agreed to that NDOW was going to provide a full-time law enforcement individual to do sting work, manage it, and we haven't had one for 3 to 5 years. I asked NDOW for a rebate because we paid for a position that was supposed to manage us full-time, and they just kind of giggled at me. I didn't think we'd get money back, but this is one of the many reasons that we wanted to have a board like Wyoming does, with input from the director on the board, a person from the commission, and a law enforcement person from NDOW. And so that's kind of the history. It's been over 20 years, and I'd like to see for the $1.5 million we've given them or more, how many illegal outfitting guys they've busted. I don't think it's less than 6, if that. The other issue is on the boxes to opt in and opt out. This is my opinion, not the outfitters, is that why can't we separate and put a box for taxidermists and outfitters, a box for mass marketing people? Because I know if you put mass marketing in with the guides and outfitter, no one wants that. To be honest with you, I have spent $5,000 in extra advertising and booking fees, at which all that $5,000 goes out of our state, and I was down 40% in my 5-year average of clients who have no way of contacting them. So we're not getting much relief on those complaints. If they did that, we could look at it and see if the list grew compared to last year. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Additional public comment in Reno?
No further comment in Reno.
Thank you. Public comment here in Las Vegas.
Good afternoon. My name is Billy Williams, for the record. I'm from Mineral County, and my board decided it was an opportunity to address the issue of elk for Mineral County. This was, we initiated this back in May of 2016. And what we are looking for is that the status of this plan be brought to the June meeting in Hawthorne so that we have all the interested parties can participate in it. That's all I have. Any questions?
I guess I have one question. Has Mineral County reached out to other neighboring counties with respect to this request?
I don't know for sure. I know that we have the subsidiary area around us. The only individual that had anything against elk was Hilton, and he is no longer in the gameplay.
I'm just thinking, I know where the Hilton Ranch is.
Correct.
And I'm thinking of what's on the other side of the mountain I see from my backyard, and there may be some farmers in my neck of the woods who have, and Lyon County Cab and others would have, you know, some input possibly on this type of plan. And then given the proximity you would have to California, seems to me with what we've seen in other parts of the state, if elk were relocated, this would need to be discussed more broadly than just Mineral County.
Well, I thought if we brought it up at this time, we could discuss it more so, because we brought it to the attention before elk and nothing has been done. And we figured that this time you're coming to Hawthorne, we'd have a captive audience.
Understood. I would say if we put that on the agenda, perhaps reach out to other people in that part of the state as well. That was more of my suggestion.
Thank you.
Thank you. Further public comment in Las Vegas? Seeing none, we will stand adjourned until tomorrow morning at 9 a.m.